The hero's last stand? What happens when a mean cop picks on the wrong old man? You won't believe this incredible true story that will make you angry, then proud, then maybe cry a little. How dare you do this to a man who gave his whole life to this country? I just want to visit my wife. What hero? Rules are rules. Now get out of here, stubborn old man, yelled Officer Tased at a veteran outside his wife's funeral. 5 minutes later, Marines took over the street. The fall morning air smelled like dead leaves and sadness. 82-year-old Tom Jenkins, stood next to the black funeral car at Green Hill Cemetery. His old, shaky hands touched the shiny surface that held his beloved wife Eleanor. After 57 years of marriage, the woman who had been his rock through 3 trips to the Vietnam War, years of bad dreams, and the hard times of getting used to normal life again was gone. Tom's old Navy suit hung loose on his skinny body. It was so different from the strong-shouldered Marine, who once carried hurt friends through the jungles of Southeast Asia. His red, tired eyes stared at the funeral car without really seeing it. He was lost in memories of Eleanor's sweet smile, and the warm hand that had pulled him back from the darkness so many times. The funeral director, Mr. Henderson, had given Tom a quiet moment before they started moving. He knew that some sadness needs to be alone. Around them, family and friends waited quietly, their own sadness mixed with the cool October air. That's when Officer Dylan Mitchell's police car pulled up to the cemetery entrance. Its lights were flashing for no good reason in the peaceful morning dot. At 26 years old, Mitchell walked around like he was better than everyone else. He had never learned the difference between having power and earning respect. His perfect uniform and mirror sunglasses made him look like he thought he was really important. This had made him unpopular with both the other cops and the people he was supposed to help. Mitchell got out of his car and right away looked at Tom, who was standing still next to the funeral car. One hand was resting on it like he was getting strength from his last connection to Eleanor. "Hey, old man," Mitchell called out, his voice cut through the serious mood like a knife. "You can't block the entrance like that. Move along." Tom looked up slowly. His sad mind had trouble understanding the harsh interruption. "I'm sorry, officer. This is my wife's funeral. I don't care what it is," Mitchell interrupted. He walked closer with the mean attitude of someone looking for a fight. "You're blocking traffic and making it dangerous. I need you to move now." Mr. Henderson stepped forward politely. "Officer, if you could just give us a few more minutes." "I wasn't talking to you," Mitchell snapped. His attention was fixed on Tom like a bully who had found what he thought was an easy target. What Officer Mitchell didn't know was that the weak old man he was being mean to was Sergeant Major Thomas Jenkins, United States Marine Corps, retired. He was a decorated hero whose military record included 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, and a Navy Cross. He earned these during some of the worst fighting of the Vietnam War. Tom's hand shook as he tried to explain his situation to the increasingly mean officer. "Please, officer, I just need a moment with my wife. She served too, you know? She was a nurse in—" "I don't want to hear your sob story." Mitchell cut him off. He stepped closer until he was invading Tom's personal space. "All I see is an old man who thinks the rules don't apply to him because he's having a bad day." The funeral people watched in growing horror as the fight got worse. Tom's daughter Patricia started to move forward, but her husband held her back. He could see the dangerous look in the officer's eyes. "Sir, I'm a veteran," Tom said quietly. His voice carried the dignity of someone who had faced much worse than a mean police officer. "I served my country for 30 years. I'm not trying to cause trouble, I just—" "Veteran?" Mitchell laughed meanly. "You look more like a homeless person to me. Probably one of those fake heroes trying to get sympathy. I've seen your type before." The words hit Tom like physical punches. After decades of service, after watching friends die in foreign jungles, after carrying pieces of metal in his leg that still hurt on cold mornings, to be called a fake was almost too much to bear. "I have my military ID," Tom offered. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket with the careful movements of someone who understood how quickly situations could get dangerous. "Don't reach for anything," Mitchell shouted. His hand moved to his taser. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Mr. Henderson stepped forward again. His voice was urgent with worry. "Officer Mitchell, please. This is Thomas Jenkins. He's a decorated Marine veteran, and we're here for his wife's funeral. Surely we can back off," Mitchell snarled. His patience was completely gone. "I'm handling this situation." Tom stood perfectly still. His military training kept him calm despite the chaos swirling around him. He had faced enemy gunfire, had been wounded in combat, had seen the worst that people could do. But somehow being threatened at his wife's funeral felt like a violation that hurt deeper than any battlefield injury. "Officer, I'm not fighting back," Tom said with the quiet authority of someone who had once commanded Marines in combat. "I'm an 82-year-old man crying for his wife." "There's no need for shut up," Mitchell screamed. His face turned red with anger at what he thought was defiance. "You think because you're old, I won't do my job? You think you can just ignore a lawful order?" Without warning, Mitchell grabbed Tom's arm and yanked him away from the funeral car. The elderly veteran stumbled. His arthritic knees nearly gave out under the sudden force. "Please," Tom gasped, trying to keep his balance. Your wife is dead," Mitchell shouted cruelly. "She doesn't care where you stand. The gasps of horror from the funeral people seemed to make Mitchell even angrier. Instead of realizing that he had crossed a line, he doubled down on his aggression. "That's it," he snarled, pulling his taser from his belt. "You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest." "I'm not resisting," Tom said quietly. His hands were raised in a gesture of surrender. "Please, officer, I'm not your enemy." But Mitchell was beyond reason now. His ego and authority were challenged by what he saw as an old man's defiance. The taser's red dot danced across Tom's chest as the officer's finger moved to the trigger. "This is what happens when you don't respect authority," Mitchell said. His voice was cold with satisfaction. The taser's electrical shock sent 82-year-old Tom Jenkins crashing to the road with a sickening thud that echoed through the cemetery like a gunshot. His weak body shook as 50,000 volts went through him. His worn suit tore as he hit the ground hard enough to split his forehead against the curb. "Dad!" Patricia screamed. She broke free from her husband's hold and rushed toward her father, who lay motionless on the ground. Blood trickled from the cut on his head. Officer Mitchell stood over Tom's lying form with a satisfied smirk. He adjusted his uniform as if he had just completed a routine traffic stop. "Maybe next time you'll listen when a police officer gives you an order," he said to the unconscious veteran. The funeral people stood in shocked silence, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Mr. Henderson knelt beside Tom, checking for a pulse while Patricia held her father's head in her lap. Her tears mixed with the blood on his forehead. "You monster," she whispered, looking up at Mitchell with a hatred that seemed to burn the air between them. "He's 82 years old. He was just grieving for his wife." Mitchell shrugged dismissively. "Age doesn't excuse you from following the law. He should have complied when I gave him a lawful order." It was then that a low rumbling sound began to build. In the distance, the deep, powerful growl of heavy military vehicles approaching at speed. The sound grew louder and more scary, causing Mitchell to look around nervously. As the rumble became a roar, the first Humvee appeared around the corner of Maple Street. It was followed by another, then another, until a full convoy of military vehicles was streaming toward the cemetery. Troop carriers, command vehicles, and finally, a black staff car with 4-star flags flying from its corners, created an impressive display of military might that brought traffic to a complete stop. "What the hell?" Mitchell muttered. His tough guy act was beginning to crack as he watched the convoy take up positions around the cemetery entrance. The vehicles came to a synchronized stop with military precision, and uniformed Marines began emerging from them with the disciplined efficiency of a combat deployment. The sight of so many active-duty personnel in full-dress uniform created an atmosphere of serious authority that made Mitchell's earlier aggression seem petty and pathetic by comparison. From the staff car stepped a tall, imposing figure whose uniform was covered with ribbons and stars that spoke of decades of distinguished service. General Mark Wallace, commander of the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force, surveyed the scene with the cold assessment of a combat veteran who had seen too much of human nature at its worst. Wallace's eyes immediately found Tom's motionless form on the ground, and his expression shifted from professional concern to barely controlled fury. He strode across the asphalt with the purposeful gait of someone accustomed to command, his gaze never leaving the injured veteran. "What happened here?" Wallace demanded. His voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded thousands of Marines in combat zones around the world. Mitchell, suddenly aware that he was facing a general officer, attempted to regain his composure. "Sir, I was responding to a disturbance. This individual was blocking traffic and refused to comply with lawful orders." Wallace knelt beside Tom. His trained eyes took in the taser, burns, the head wound, and the obvious signs of an elderly man who had been brutally assaulted. When he looked up at Mitchell, his eyes were like chips of ice. "This individual," Wallace said, his voice deadly quiet, "is Sergeant Major Thomas Jenkins, United States Marine Corps, retired. He served 3 tours in Vietnam, earned 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, and a Navy Cross. He saved my life in 1968 when I was a green lieutenant who didn't know enough to duck." The color drained from Mitchell's face as the implications of what Wallace was saying began to sink in. Around them, the Marines who had emerged from the convoy were coming to attention, their faces reflecting the same cold fury that radiated from their commanding general. "Sir, I didn't know," Mitchell began, but Wallace cut him off with a gesture that could have frozen fire. "You didn't know because you didn't care to know," Wallace said, rising to his full height and fixing Mitchell with a stare that had intimidated enemy commanders and incompetent subordinates alike. "You saw an old man and decided he was beneath your consideration. You attacked a decorated war hero at his wife's funeral because your ego was more important than basic human decency." Tom's eyes fluttered open, and he looked up to see the general's concerned face above him. "Mark," he whispered. His voice was weak but filled with recognition. "Mark Wallace. Is that really you?" "It's me, Sergeant Major," Wallace replied gently. His tone was completely different from the one he had used with Mitchell. "I'm here, and I'm going to make sure this is made right." The confrontation between General Wallace and Officer Mitchell had drawn the attention of everyone in the vicinity, including passing motorists who had stopped to witness the unprecedented scene of a four-star general facing down a local police officer over the assault of an elderly veteran. Mitchell, his face now a sickly shade of green, attempted to salvage the situation with the desperate bravado of someone who knew his career was hanging by a thread. General, with all due respect, I was just doing my job. I had no way of knowing this man's background. Wallace's response was delivered with the precision of a surgical strike. Officer Mitchell, your job is to serve and protect, not to assault elderly citizens at their spouse's funeral. The fact that you didn't know Sergeant Major Jenkins' background is irrelevant. What matters is that you saw a grieving old man and decided violence was your first option. Tom, with Patricia's help, was struggling to sit up, despite the lingering effects of the taser and his head injury. The sight of his childhood friend now, a general defending him, brought tears to his eyes. But it also triggered memories of the day in Vietnam when their roles had been reversed. Mark, you don't need to, Tom began weakly. Yes, I do, Wallace interrupted firmly. Sergeant Major, you saved my life when I was too young and stupid to save myself. You carried me 3 miles through enemy territory with a bullet in your own leg. The least I can do is make sure you're treated with the respect you've earned. The general turned back to Mitchell, his voice rising so that everyone present could hear clearly. This man spent 30 years serving his country. He bled for it, sacrificed for it, and lost friends defending it. His wife Eleanor was an army nurse who served 2 tours herself. They gave everything to protect people like you, and this is how you repay that sacrifice? Mitchell's attempts at justification were becoming increasingly desperate. Sir, he was blocking the entrance. I had to maintain order. Order. Wallace's voice cracked like a whip. You call tasering an 82-year-old man at his wife's funeral maintaining order. You call assaulting a decorated veteran who is simply saying goodbye to his spouse maintaining order. The crisis deepened when Chief Thompson arrived on scene, having been alerted by multiple phone calls about the incident. The police chief took one look at Tom's condition, the assembled Marines, and Mitchell's panicked expression, and immediately understood that his department was facing a public relations disaster of epic proportions. General Wallace, Chief Thompson said respectfully, I want to assure you that this incident will be thoroughly investigated. Chief Thompson, Wallace replied, his tone marginally more civil but still carrying an edge of controlled fury. I've known you for 15 years. You're a good man and a good cop. But this officer of yours has committed an act of such callous disregard for human dignity that investigation isn't enough. This requires immediate action. The general gestured toward Tom, who was now sitting upright but clearly still suffering from the effects of the assault. Sergeant Major Jenkins earned his rank through 3 decades of exemplary service. He earned his medals through acts of courage that saved American lives. He earned his retirement through sacrifices that most people can't even imagine. And your officer decided that none of that mattered because an old man was inconveniencing him. Mitchell, realizing that his career was effectively over, made one last desperate attempt to shift blame. The man was acting suspicious. In today's security environment, I had to assume you had to assume nothing. Wallace cut him off with volcanic fury. You had to show basic human decency to a grieving widower. You had to remember that your badge is supposed to protect people, not terrorize them. You had to act like a professional instead of a schoolyard bully. The general's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than his earlier shouting. Officer Mitchell, you have disgraced your uniform, your department, and your oath. You have attacked a man who has given more to this country than you could give in 10 lifetimes. And you did it at the funeral of his wife, a woman who also served with honor and distinction. Chief Thompson, recognizing that immediate action was necessary to prevent the situation from escalating further, stepped forward with grim determination. Officer Mitchell, you are hereby relieved of duty pending a full investigation. Turn in your badge and weapon immediately. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and everyone present understood that they were witnessing the consequences of power without wisdom, authority without compassion, and the price of disrespecting those who had earned honor through sacrifice. The moment Chief Thompson relieved Officer Mitchell of duty marked a turning point that transformed the entire atmosphere around Green Hill Cemetery. As Mitchell fumbled with his badge and weapon, his hands shaking with the realization that his law enforcement career was over, General Wallace turned his attention to the more important matter of honoring the man he had wronged. Marines, Wallace called out, his voice carrying the authority of command across the cemetery grounds. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every Marine who had emerged from the convoy snapped to attention with parade ground precision. Their dress blue, uniforms creating a sea of military bearing that stretched across the cemetery entrance. The sight of so many active duty personnel showing respect to Tom brought tears to the eyes of the funeral attendees. Present arms, Wallace commanded. In perfect unison, the Marines rendered a salute that lasted for a full minute, a gesture of respect that spoke louder than any words could have. Tom, still sitting on the ground with Patricia supporting him, looked up at the assembled warriors with wonder and gratitude that transcended his physical pain. Sergeant Major Jenkins, Wallace said, kneeling beside his old friend. I want to personally apologize for what happened here today. No veteran, no American citizen, should ever be treated the way you were treated. Tom's voice was weak but steady as he replied, Mark, you don't owe me any apologies. You came when I needed you, just like old times. Wallace helped Tom to his feet, supporting the elderly veteran with the same care Tom had shown him decades earlier in a Vietnamese jungle. Sergeant Major, would you allow my Marines to provide an honor guard for Eleanor's funeral? It's the least we can do to show proper respect for a fellow veteran and her family. The offer brought fresh tears to Tom's eyes. Eleanor had always been proud of her own service as an army nurse, and she would have been deeply moved by the gesture. She would have loved that, Mark. She always said the military was the finest family we ever had. As the Marines began forming up for the honor guard, Mr. Henderson approached with profound relief evident on his face. General, if I may, we are ready to proceed with the service whenever you give the word. Wallace nodded solemnly. Mr. Henderson, we'll follow your lead. This is Eleanor's day, and we're here to honor her memory and support her family. The transformation of the funeral procession was remarkable. What had begun as a private family service became a military ceremony worthy of the heroes being honored. The Marines formed two parallel lines leading from the hearse to the gravesite, creating a corridor of honor through which Eleanor's casket would pass. As the funeral director and pallbearers prepared to move the casket, Wallace personally escorted Tom, ensuring that the elderly veteran was steady on his feet and able to participate in his wife's final farewell. The contrast between this respectful treatment and Mitchell's earlier brutality was stark and powerful. Order arms, Wallace commanded. As the procession began to move, the Marines lowered their salutes in perfect synchronization, then fell into step. Behind the casket, as it was carried toward the gravesite, the precision and dignity of their movements created an atmosphere of solemn respect that elevated the entire ceremony. Patricia walked beside her father, amazed by the transformation that had taken place. Dad, how do you know the general? She whispered. Tom's eyes were fixed on Eleanor's casket as he replied, I saved his life once, a long time ago, but he saved mine more times than I can count since then, just by being the kind of man who remembers his debts. The graveside service proceeded with military precision and civilian warmth. The chaplain's words were enhanced by the silent presence of the Marines, whose bearing spoke of the honor and sacrifice that both Tom and Eleanor had embodied throughout their lives. The climactic moment came when the service concluded and Wallace personally presented the folded American flag to Tom. The general's words were simple but profound. Sergeant Major, this flag is presented on behalf of a grateful nation in recognition of Eleanor's service as an army nurse and your own distinguished career as a Marine. Your sacrifices have not been forgotten. Tom accepted the flag with trembling, hands holding it against his chest as if it contained Eleanor's spirit. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for remembering what service means. As the Marines began to disperse, many of them approached Tom individually to shake his hand and express their respect. Word of the incident had spread through military social media, and these young warriors understood that they were meeting a living piece of history, a man who had served with honor when their own grandfathers were their age. Mitchell, meanwhile, had been escorted away by Chief Thompson, his career in ruins, and his actions destined to become a cautionary tale about the importance of treating all citizens with dignity and respect. The video of his assault on Tom, captured by multiple phones, would ensure that his name became synonymous with the abuse of authority. The climax concluded with General Wallace making a personal commitment to Tom. Sergeant Major, I want you to know that you'll always have the support of the Marine Corps family. If you ever need anything, medical care, assistance with benefits, or just someone to talk to you, call me directly. Tom nodded gratefully, understanding that this support represented more than just military courtesy. It was the fulfillment of a bond forged in combat and strengthened by mutual respect across the decades. As the Marines loaded back into their vehicles and prepared to depart, the cemetery returned to its peaceful state. But the impact of what had happened would resonate far beyond this single day, serving as a reminder that heroes walk among us, often unrecognized until circumstances reveal their true worth. 6 months after the incident at Green Hill Cemetery, the ripple effects of Officer Mitchell's assault on Tom Jenkins continued to reshape both the local community and the broader conversation about how veterans are treated in civilian society. Mitchell had been terminated from the police force and faced federal charges for violating Tom's civil rights. The video of him tasering an 82-year-old veteran at his wife's funeral had gone viral, becoming a powerful symbol of the abuse of authority and the importance of treating all citizens with dignity. His name had become synonymous with police misconduct, ensuring that his law enforcement career was permanently over. Chief Thompson had used the incident as a catalyst for comprehensive police reform, implementing new training programs focused on de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, and proper treatment of veterans. The department now required all officers to complete courses on recognizing and respecting military service. With Tom himself serving as a guest speaker, every person you encounter has a story, Tom would tell the rookie officers. Your job is to protect and serve, not to judge and punish. The badge gives you authority, but it's your character that determines how you use it. General Wallace had kept his promise to support Tom, ensuring that the elderly veteran received all the medical care and benefits he was entitled to. More importantly, he had facilitated Tom's connection with other veterans in the area, helping to combat the isolation that had deepened after Eleanor's death. Tom had become something of a local celebrity, but he wore the attention with the same quiet dignity that had defined his military service. He spent his time volunteering at the VA hospital, sharing his story with younger veterans who were struggling with their own transitions to civilian life. Service doesn't end when you take off the uniform, he would tell them. It just changes form. The cemetery where Eleanor was buried had become a pilgrimage site for Marines and other veterans who wanted to pay their respects to both Tom and his wife. A small memorial plaque had been installed near Eleanor's grave, honoring her service as an Army nurse and recognizing the sacrifice of military families. Most significantly, the incident had sparked a national conversation about the hidden veterans in every community, the quiet heroes who had served with distinction but lived without recognition. Tom's story had reminded America that respect for those who served should be automatic, not conditional on knowing their service record. Eleanor always said that the best way to honor the fallen is to take care of the living. Tom reflected during a television interview. Maybe that's the real lesson here. We all have a duty to look out for each other. This story demonstrates how individual acts of courage and sacrifice create bonds that transcend time, and how the military family's commitment to leave no one behind extends far beyond the battlefield.